And hello, fabulous AP students. This is your favorite teacher, Mr. Jacobson. I am excited to be with you today. Today, it's all about sectional conflict, regional differences. How are the North and the South getting along? What are the catalysts that make them continue to escalate to the eventual Civil War? So let us begin. All right, so we got a few things happening here. We got Irish who are immigrating to America. You got nearly 2 million Irish who are going to immigrate to the U.S. between 1844 and 1877. And they're going to do that because, they're going to try to escape some pretty bad thing. That Ireland is, Ireland's an island, and you have some plagues that are hitting, some famines in that region, and people are looking for new opportunities. So many people are going to come over from Ireland. They're going to they're going to be hardworking people, but they're going to have low skills, so they're going to compete a lot with African Americans as a result. Irish are going to typically be Roman Catholic, and that's going to be a problem because America is proudly Protestant, largely. Um, and then you're going to get these enclaves or little Irish communities within cities like Boston and New York. We're going to have several newspapers. They'll be written in the Irish language. Now, a lot of Irish people speak English because, Britain controlled Ireland for so long. So they'll also know English, but Irish, the language itself, will also be printed in that area. And we're going to see a lot of things like Irish are going to kind of gravitate towards the Democratic Party. They're going to be familiar with, the electoral process because of their ties with England. And you're going to get Irish who are going to eventually start kind of controlling things in politics. Especially in New York, you're going to have the Democratic organization, Tammany Hall, and you're going to have Irish who will eventually start, the majority of it. So Irish are gonna make some splashes here in America as time continues on. Now you also have Germans who are gonna be coming over. Germans, as they came over, they were a little bit more well-to-do coming than Irish. They had skills in farming and artisanship. Um, and what they want is they're looking for land to settle in that they could just have opportunity, be a farmer looking for that land in the usually like in the northeast area was where they would head for as they I'm sorry, northwest. And as they would come, they'd be more and more interested in politics as they keep coming over and kind of setting a foothold here in America. They're going to be very interested in the public education, and they're going to be largely opposed to slavery. So you're going to get these close-knit German enclaves, if you will, communities, and we're going to see a lot of Germans come over. They're going to be both Roman Catholic and Lutheran. Now we're going to get some opposition to all these immigrants coming over. The native-born Americans are not going to like all this. So what they're going to start doing is they're going to start discriminating against them because, the Roman Catholic and they're different and they're probably stealing all their jobs or whatever, right? So we're going to get into this attitude of nativism, which is hostilities towards immigrants. And this will even lead to some riots. So nativism kind of comes on the stage. There's this picturesque idea of what an American should be, and they don't feel like these immigrants from Germany and Ireland are picturing or fulfilling that picturesque idea, right? We're also going to get some secret anti-foreign societies formed called the Supreme Order of the Star-Spangled Banner, and they'll eventually become known as the American Party or the Know Nothing Party. The reason why they're called the Know Nothing Party is they'd be interviewed, and people ask them things on politics because they're American Party, and some of them would say I know nothing. So as a result, they became the Know Nothing Party. But anyway, so these people they wanted to make the wait time for citizenship, which was 5 years, they wanted to make it 21 years. So they're really against the whole, immigrating over here, which is interesting since America was nothing but immigrants. But anyway, yeah, the Whig Party is going to decrease. The American Party will start taking its place in some areas like New England, Mid Atlantic states. They'll even run their own president, although unsuccessful, Millard Fillmore. And then you're going to get some, as we get closer to Civil War, the the idea of immigrants coming over and the perceived problems that were happening with them coming over is gonna not be so. They're not gonna care as much because they got war coming on the horizon, and so more people are gonna be more preoccupied, and occupied with that. We're also gonna see ethnic conflicts happening. I mean, with the Mexican cession and the Mexican American War and all that, you're gonna see uh, you got Mexicans who are now part of the union, if you will. You got Native Americans who are being interacted with now as people are going west, and they're kind of feeling threatened by people encroaching on their land. So we'll get conflicts over there. Uh, you're gonna have some industrial technologies that will boom. So in 1840, we got industrialization is going to spread, especially through the Northeast. Um, you got new factories. They're going to produce like shoes, sewing machines, ready to wear clothing, firearms, precision tools, iron products for railroads. The sewing machine by Elias Howe is going to make a really big difference. You also have the electric telegraph that will be invented by Samuel F.B. Morse, and that's going to just speed up the ability to communicate and transport things, which will be very handy. You also have railroads coming about, so there are all these canal buildings going on, right? But now, why do that when you can build a railroad? So a lot of railroads are going to start springing up, especially in the Northeast and Northwest region, uh, which is going to give an advantage that the North will have over the South when the Civil War does hit, right? But we're going to see all these different places pop up. We're going to see companies and investors spending money to build the railroad to connect America in a way that it's never been connected before. I mean, look at over here in the picture. You're going to see the Illinois Central Railroad, and they're going to go all the way down to New Orleans, and they're going to connect the North and the South in that way. And I mean, you still have the Mississippi River, but railroads are going to be much faster and with cheap energy, it's very efficient. So people are going to go more towards that route with the railroads. So there was a panic that happened. There's always a panic going on like every 30 years in America. So there's a panic of 1857, right? And in this panic, you're going to see a lot of problems hit. Unemployment's going to skyrocket in the northern cities. Agricultural products are going to be the prices are going to sharply increase. However, the South doesn't get really affected by it. And the South is going to go ahead and jump to the conclusion that, hey, we didn't get affected by this panic because our economic system of slavery and plantations are more superior than the Northern economy. So, I mean, again, we have some further separation and pointing of fingers happening. You're also going to have more issues on the the topic of slavery. Between the Compromise of 1850 and the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, you're going to see some political tensions relax slightly. However, we're also going to see the Fugitive Slave Act that's going to be passed, and that ain't going to go so well. So let's talk about that right now. So the Fugitive Slave Act is in 1850. It's going to be used to persuade Southerners that California be a free state because that was an issue, right? So they're gonna go ahead and say, fine, California could be a free state, and then, but we want this, fugitive slave law. So that is the compromise, and they're more willing to go along with the California being a free state because of it. So the purpose was to help track down runaway slaves that escaped to the north and capture them and return them to their owner. Fugitive slave cases were no longer in state courts but were held under the federal courts. So you couldn't, if your state wasn't, prone to slavery or like it, then you couldn't try it in a state court. You had to go all the way to the federal court, which was taking power away from states, and the South is usually for power to the states, except in this case. It authorized special U.S. commissioners to issue warrants to arrest fugitives. A captured person who claimed to be free and not someone who had just escaped slavery was denied the right by trial. And you have state and local law enforcements who were required to help enforce the federal law. So um, a lot of a lot of compulsion with this law. Some loopholes that people had that they liked to sort of help spur the anti-slavery movement were kind of being closed on them, these loopholes, and that wasn't very popular for the North. Anyone who tried to hide a runaway slave were going to receive heavy penalties by the government. Black and white activists bitterly resisted the law through court cases, protests, and even force. So this was not well received, and again, we're further driving that wedge between the two, North and South. You also have the Underground Railroad that's happening. So you've probably heard of Harriet Tubman. She is sort of the most famous conductor, if you will, of this Underground Railroad. It wasn't really a railroad, it was basically a path that many people took, usually at night, to try to escape the South and get to the North or go on to Canada where they could be free. So that was the issue. Now, most of these conductors, they were operating at stations. These were free Africans and people who had escaped slavery themselves with the assistance of white abolitionists. So you're looking at African slaves who are now free, right? They're going down. Harriet Tubman's going to be the most famous. I mean, she made at least 19 trips and helped some 300 people escape slavery. So she is quite the heroine, and a great role model to look up to when it comes to just doing what you feel is right deep at your core, even if it means civil disobedience. Now, many of the white abolitionists were some of the hubs where people would stay the night or whatever and take cover. So you have white abolitionists, you have freed uh, black former slaves, if you will, and they're kind of coming together to create this underground railroad, which is going to further drive another wedge between the South and the North, right? Nevertheless, we're going to see that during the Civil War, leaders like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and Sojourner Truth, they're going to work for emancipation and support black soldiers during the war too. So, great things happening there. Now, we have some books on slaveries that are pretty controversial but very significant, right? So we have Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, this is probably the most influential book of its day. It was a novel, and the conflict between an enslaved man, Tom, and the brutal white slave owner, Simon Legree. So the publication Tom's Cabin in 1852 by the Northern writer Harriet Beecher Stowe caused a generation of Northerners and many Europeans to regard all slave owners as cruel and inhumane. So the book isn't very favorable. It doesn't paint a very favorable light on slave owners. And so the South, they're not going to like that. They're like, that's kind of demonizing. And they didn't feel it was all true. So they're going to feel like this is just the North constantly, demonizing the South, and is further evidence that they're never going to be able to come to some kind of an agreement, right? The North will always demonize the South, and the South's always going to feel like the North's picking on them. Um, and so again, we get closer and closer to the Civil War as a result. It was said by that President Lincoln, he will meet Harriet Beecher Stowe, and he is reported to have said, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that made this great war." So it's obvious this book had a profound impact on America. In response to Stowe's book, Mary Eastman wrote the pro slavery novel Aunt Phyllis's Cabin, portraying a world of kind slave owners and happily enslaved people. And just so you know, Harriet Beecher Stowe should be in red, but I didn't get that. I didn't do it. I missed that. All right, Impending Crisis of the South. So in 1857, Hinton R. Helper, he's going to write a nonfiction book called The Impending Crisis of the South. Here it is over here. And basically, he's going to show statistics of how slavery has weakened the Southern economy. Of course, Southern states are going to ban the book. They're not going to like that. And they're going to, again, it's another wedge driving further between the South and the North, right? The South's reaction to all this, they're going to look at all this, and they're going to kind of look at this idea that they're not going to get along. Okay? Um, they're going to argue that slavery is a good thing and that, there's a good relationship between master and enslaved. The South are going to point out that if through their interpretation that slavery is sanctioned by the Bible and grounded in the philosophy and history, including the U.S. Constitution. Southern authors are going to contrast the conditions of the Northern wages worker or wage slaves and forced to work long hours in factories and mines up in the North are like, look, you got the same kind of slavery, you just give them a wage, but they're still slaves, they're still working away each day in the factory, and they don't even have the familial bonds that happen on a plantation between the slave and its master. So, again, that's their argument. You have George Fitzhugh, and he's going to be the best known pro slavery author. He's going to question the principles of equal rights and for unequal men and attack the wage system as the worse than slavery. And he's going to write a book called The Sociology of the South and All Cannibals. And here is the Sociology of the South here. So what's going on here? Well, there are going to be effects happening to this, right? So the Fugitive Slave Law and the books of slavery are going to increasingly polarize the nation. Many Northerners who had opposed the expansion of slavery only for economic reasons and had scorned abolition became more concerned about slavery as a moral issue. At the same time, a growing number of Southerners, particularly wealthy ones, became more convinced that Northerners would abolish slavery and their whole way of life, and they're like, we can't have this. So some of the causes, if you look over here, you could say the Compromise of 1850, Uncle Tom's Cabin, Kansas-Nebraska Act, the uh, the formation of the Republican Party, Bleeding Kansas, the Dred Scott versus Sanford, um, the Lincoln Douglas debates, and then you have Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. And so it's happening. We're getting closer and closer to Civil War, and hopefully you're kind of getting an idea of the painted picture of why this is a pot that's just minutes from boiling over. So go ahead and write that summary, and we'll discuss this when we return.